Hey guys, Nathan at Duck River Honey, and this is going to be the fourth and likely the final video in my swarm trapping series. If you've not watched the first three videos, I would encourage you to do so. The first one talks about different types of swarm traps and the pros and cons of those, as well as what bees are looking for when they select a new home. The second video talks about how to bait and lure a swarm trap with a focus on overcoming a new lumber smell. Bees really have a preference for houses that have been lived in before that smell like other bees. So if you're starting with no bee equipment, it's tough to overcome that. The third video talked about where to put swarm traps. So watch those if you haven't. This video is going to be more of an advanced level, assuming that you may already have bees, you may have equipment that smells like bees, with a real focus on minimizing my time and aggravation in swarm trapping while maximizing my success rate. So I'm going to get started by again recommending that you get a free copy of Bait Hives for Honeybees. This was put out by Dr. Thomas Seeley in 1989. You can download this from Cornell's website. It's PDF, very short. I'll leave a link to it in the description. There's a section in here with 12 points that talks about what bees are looking for when they select their new home and whether those are important or not. I'm not going to cover that whole list. I am going to talk about 7 specific things that bees are looking for and the importance of those. So number 1, cavity size. Bees are looking for something around a 40-liter cavity. Bigger swarms will look for a little bigger space. Smaller swarms may look for a little smaller space. Too small is very unattractive. Too big is very unattractive. Number 2 is going to be entrance size and location. The bees like for the entrance to be in the bottom of the cavity, and they want it to be about a 1.5 to 2 inch hole entrance area. That gives them a very defensible entrance. Number 3, drawn comb, and I'll put bee smell in there as well. Cavities that have been occupied by honeybees before are highly, highly attractive. If the cavity has drawn comb in it already, that saves the bees a ton of work. It takes a lot of honey or nectar to produce honeycomb. So if the bees can start out with drawn comb, it dramatically increases their chances of making it through their first winter. Number 4 is going to be height above the ground. And bees do have a preference for being high above the ground, 15, 20 feet up. They really like my swarm traps that I put in ladder tree stands. That makes it fairly easy for me to get to and lower them down, and the bees really do seem to like those. Number 5 is shade. Bees show a preference for at least partial shade. If you put a swarm trap in direct sun, they move in, they get a hot day, they may abandon it. Or abscond from that box just because it is so hot. It's going to take them a lot of work to keep it cool. Number 6 is dryness and light tightness. I don't know that this is a real preference that the bees have, but I will tell you that bees will absolutely refuse a box that is wet. And we'll get into that later when I talk about the mistakes that I've made this past year. Number 7 is empty space, and this is not one of Dr. Seeley's, this is one of mine through my reading and research on swarm trapping. I do believe that empty space within the swarm trap is a preference item for honeybees. And as you can see in this trap here, I've got a medium super with a spacer underneath that gives them empty space. This box, medium super on top with a medium super on the bottom, if I wanted to give them empty space, I could leave this bottom super empty. I do think that is a preference item for bees, but I'm actually going to go away from that this year, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. All right guys, let's talk about the major mistakes that I made in swarm trapping last year. There were several. Some of it is just fine-tuning and were pretty minor, but one major mistake that I made was getting water in the swarm traps, and it's specifically in this style swarm trap. So what I've got here is a newly painted migratory lid that has never been on a beehive, so the bees have not propolized this at all. And what that means is the edges here don't have propolis seals to keep water out. So water can trickle in the top and maybe between the spacer and this medium super. And since I've got plywood connected to this spacer here, and I glued this thing all the way around, this is watertight. It actually holds water. And at the end of the season last year, I had some traps that I had seen bees investigating, and I would think, okay, within about a week I'll have a swarm here. They never moved in, and I was really curious as to why. When I took the trap down, water poured out of it. So this was actually holding water. I did not notice that at all on the swarm traps that I put telescopic lids on. So that's a big thing that I learned this past year. On swarm traps that don't have bees in them, that are going to be in the rain for 2 or 3 months, I'm going with all telescopic lids on them this year. Another thing that I started doing is I'm drilling 1/2-inch holes in the bottom, all 4 corners on the bottom of these style spacers. I do like these spacers, especially with this entrance disc. I really like that entrance disc a lot. It makes it very easy to lock the bees up and move them. But I'm probably going to go away from this in the most part this year in favor of a little easier system. So these swarm trap platforms that I built, for the most part, these worked wonderfully well. They fold up flat. They are very easy to store. I've got this chain here that makes them adjustable, so I can set the pitch. That also makes it easy to use trees with different lean. You can see this elm here is leaning toward me just a bit, so I've got the chain shortened up. This works great. The only mistake that I made with these is I did not reinforce this cross brace enough. I put 4 screws in it. I called that good. But as you can see from the design here, all of the force of this platform is transferred straight to this brace, and I'm using recycled decking boards. So I did have a couple of these pull off and drop the trap on the ground. Now, thankfully, that did not cause them any problems because they had not caught swarms yet. I actually had one that was a double medium I found on the ground and fixed it, and a couple weeks later had a good sized swarm in there. So just beware on this. What I'm doing for this year is I'm actually putting 2 carriage bolts in here just to reinforce this platform, make sure it's plenty strong. I really don't know whether to call this a mistake or not, but in almost all of my traps last year, I either used the Man Lake swarm lure or Swarm Commander in the vials. So the Man Lake lure has actually got 2 little vials of a lemongrass or Swarm Commander type lure in there, and you can staple those inside the trap. So those work. They do work in attracting bees, but I think they can also be a little overpowering because I think I had 3 swarms last year that clustered on the outside of the box. One or a couple of them actually started building comb underneath the swarm trap, and they just refused to go into the box. They refused it completely. And I think that swarm lure being too powerful may have had something to do with that. The final mistake that I made, I got this right most of the time, but when I would catch a swarm and put it in a box that had pure foundation in it, I almost always would give them a gallon of sugar syrup right off the bat. And every swarm that I did that with, whether it was a caught or a trap or whatever, they stuck. They stuck in the box. But I caught one swarm and got them in the box and didn't go until the following afternoon to get some feed into them, and they were gone. So I'd already moved them onto a hive stand and everything, and they completely absconded and went somewhere else. And I feel like if I had gone ahead and given them that sugar syrup, they would have stuck in the box. They would have started building comb immediately. And just beware of that. If you catch a swarm in front of one of your hives or something like that, get some feed in them really quick, especially if you're putting them in a box that only has foundation in it. All right, now let's take a closer look at how I'm going to set my swarm traps up for this coming year. So I've already mentioned that I'm going to switch some things around this year in the interest of reducing my time and aggravation involved in swarm trapping. And I'd like to say that it takes bees to make bees, and if you've already got bees, it's a lot easier to get more bees. So I've got used equipment now, which is highly attractive to bees. I've got some drawn comb I can use, which is highly attractive to bees. Last year I didn't have those resources, so I had to try to put together the most attractive traps I possibly could. I was painting the insides with wax. I was, just using every little trick I could to try to attract bees. This is an all-encompassing discussion. When you talk about what the bees are looking for, I've listed these 7 things: cavity size, interest size and location, drawn comb and bee smell, height, shade, dryness and light tightness, and then empty space. All of those play into the equation, but none of them are the all-important thing. I do think that cavity size and the entrance size and location are extremely important. Drawn comb and bee smell is extremely attractive. Height is attractive. Shade is attractive. Dryness and light tightness, it may not be that attractive, but if you've got water sitting in your box, they will refuse it. Empty space, I believe, is attractive, but that empty space causes me problems, and it's a problem of time. So when the bees move in, I've got this empty box as a spacer, they will start building comb, and within a week or so, they'll have comb hanging down off of the frames. And then I've got to cut that comb off, and I've got to run my traps at least once a week so that if I catch bees, I can go get them and not have wonky comb and too many things that can become a cutout. So I'm not doing that this year. I'm not going to run my traps every week. So I'm going to put together double mediums with 10 frames in the bottom and 8 frames in the top with a double frame feeder. I'll break this box open and show you that. So the reason I'm going with this orientation is this is how I set up most of my hives. This double medium is going to run about 62 liters, but with this feeder in here, that takes up 2 frames, which is about 10%, so that's going to bring it back to about 55. This trap is technically too big, but I've caught good swarms in double mediums. I know that it will work, and I think it may catch a little bigger swarm. The most important thing to me, though, is with these guys set up on a solid bottom and the box full of frames, I can leave them in there all year. I don't care how long they stay in there, which means I can check my traps not when I have to, but when it's convenient. I may not be quite as successful. We'll see. I bet I'm actually more successful this year because I've got some drawn comb to put in here and I've got bee smell. There's propolis right there. You can see I've actually got some extracted brood comb there that I'm going to put 1 to 2 frames in each one of these boxes as long as I have some comb to put in them. And that's probably, the presence of bee smell and that drawn comb is probably the most important thing that I can do to make this box attractive to honeybees. So another thing that I'm doing this year is I actually stapled this entrance reducer down to the bottom board. Getting these things stuck in place when you're trying to get the box up in a tree and down from the tree with bees in it, they want to move and slide out, and it makes it very difficult to lock the entrance in. So I stapled this down, and then I'll either cover that with duct tape or use a number 8 wire mesh shoved in the entrance, cut it just the right size to block the entrance when I go to move the bees, if I need to move the bees. And that brings up another point that I'm changing for this year. I will still put some traps in some swarm trap locations, especially where I've caught bees before that I know are very attractive. But I'm also going to set some of these up on hive stands. if I've got a box that smells like bees that they really want to move into, and I can put it on a hive stand and I don't need to move them or reorient them in any way, that's what I want to have happen. I want the bees to move where I want them to go. And if I can make that happen, that would be, the best possible solution. Bees move in where I want them to end up being, and they're in a box that doesn't require any work on my part, and I can just get to them whenever I want to. So I'm baiting and luring swarm traps this year. Obviously, I've got boxes that smell like bees. I've got drawn comb inside. I prefer 2 combs. The queen can go in and start laying right away. That will lock them in this box, whether I'm able to get feed in there or not. I'm not going to put any lemongrass oil or Swarm Commander inside the box. And that's because I had those 3 refusals last year that were either leaving or building underneath the trap. I believe that an overpowering Nasanov smell may have contributed to that. So the Swarm Commander LGO I will use on the outside of the trap to help bees locate it. That will wear off with rain and wind, so I'll freshen that as I have the chance. Between the lemongrass oil and Swarm Commander, I used both last year and tried to really look at which one was working better, and honestly I couldn't tell much difference. But I'm going to use Swarm Commander going forward for 2 reasons. Number 1 is I can get it in a spray bottle, which is very quick and easy to use. Even when it's up above my head, I can jump up, spray the front of the hive, be done. Lemongrass oil has a bottle with an eyedropper, and I didn't like that. It's harder to use. And also, Swarm Commander is sold by Blythewood Bee Company, and even though it's a more expensive product than lemongrass oil, the company selling it has Bee Company in their name, and I know it's an American company even if they're importing the stuff. So, I'd rather buy that and support the beekeeping industry than support some essential oil industry overseas. So I'm going to go with Swarm Commander in the spray bottle. So overall, I hope it's going to be a successful swarm trapping season. It's almost time to be thinking about getting traps out. I'll probably be getting some out around the 1st of March. And honestly, this year I hope I'm more successful and have less work put into it. That's really the goal. I'm definitely going to have less work put into it. Like I said, I've got bees now, so it's easier to make bees when you've already got bees. If I get to June or July and don't have as many colonies as I want, I can split them. I can buy queens if I need to. I can graft. I just have a lot more options now that I have hives to work with. Guys, I'd like to add that swarm trapping is a whole lot of fun. I run the trap line with my 2 kids. They're 6 and 3 this year, and they know where the swarm traps are, and we look at bees flying in and out, and we talk about whether they're investigating the trap, if they're scouts, or if they've already moved in, and it's just a lot of fun. It's like opening a Christmas present that you didn't expect when you actually have a swarm in that trap. So I would really encourage you to get into it. It's a fun thing to do, even if you just end up giving the bees away. If you don't need them, it's just a fun thing to do. It's also a really good way to get freebies. And if you're in a wild area without a lot of commercial beekeepers or people importing packages from down south, you can get some locally adapted bees that, if they're feral, from a feral population, then they've probably got some adaptations to be more of a varroa mite resistant bee. So you never know what you're going to get, but you could get something really good. So it's a fun thing to do. You can get some freebies. You may be able to get some really good bees out of it. I'd encourage everybody to try swarm trapping.